You are listening to the Cycling Podcast Féminin, supported by Rapha, celebrating the sport and producing the finest cycling clothing since 2004.
Hello, my name is Richard Moore. I'm with Orla Chennaoui.
Hello, Richard.
And by popular request...
Oh, the laugh, Richard. It is by popular request, actually.
She's back, Rose Manley.
I'm here for the people. People power.
When I say popular request, I mean one email.
One person. Yeah, but that's enough.
We got an email after you appeared on last month's podcast, Rose, and it was the subject was Rose Manley. And it was a Catherine Elliott. Hey there, Cycling Podcast people. I've just finished listening to episode 21 of the Cycling Podcast Féminin and just want to say what an excellent guest Rose Manley was. She was smart, funny, interesting, and showed just the right level of respect for Richard, i.e. not much at all. You should definitely have her back on, and I think she should become part of the regular Cycling Podcast family. Yeah, I don't think we'll go that far. You're still on...
At least you got mentioned in terms of respect, though.
Still
I didn't even merit a mention.
We've literally never had an email like that for either you or me, Orla. Don't look so upset. Don't look so upset. You've got a chance to redeem yourself.
She's going to show us up now.
Now, listen, we're in March now and we're well into the season. The Women's World Tour is underway. We'll get all the nuts and bolts of what's happened so far, hopefully in your news roundup, Orla.
Yeah, what's Lionel's
60% accuracy.
60% accuracy.
I think you got about 53 last time.
I did not. I got almost 80.
So,
I just made that up, but we'll go with almost 80.
We're going to get your news roundup in a moment. We're actually recording on a Thursday, and that's kind of bad timing because there are two Women's World Tour events coming up imminently. You will get the results of those races in this news roundup because we'll add them in and we'll talk about anything significant that happens in those races as well at the end of the episode if necessary.
And they'll definitely be accurate.
Otherwise, it'll wait until next month. We do have lots to talk about in this episode. You were at the launch of the Women's Tour, Orla. I was at Het Nieuwsblad. You're just back from the Trofeo Alfredo Binda, the latest Women's World Tour event as we speak in Italy, Rose. So we've got interviews with some of the main players from these races and from the launch of the Women's Tour. We'll hear all those. But first, Orla, can you bring us up to speed?
Oh, pressure. Yes, I will try. And this time, if I get it wrong, correct me on the spot. Don't wait until I've driven home and then point out that somebody's listened to it somewhere. Anyway, news roundup, as I think happened. Strade Bianche, of course, the opening round of the Women's World Tour. It was Anna van der Breggen of Boels Dolmans, last year's World Tour winner, who continued with her winning ways. Queen of the Classics. What?
I'm joking.
You properly got me. I'm like, oh my God.
I was shocked as well.
Fake news. Come on.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Carry
my nerves will be shredded by the end of this. As I was. Yes. Anyway, last year's Queen of the Classics, Anna van der Breggen, winning the opening round of the Women's World Tour, Strade Bianche. Kasia Niewiadoma, second again for the third time in a row. And Elisa Longo-Borghini, the defending champion, in third. Van der Breggen called it one of the hardest races she's ever done. And Niewiadoma said hell is not enough of a word to describe the conditions today. So we'll get to that in just a moment. Ronde van Drenthe was the second race. Amy Pieters continuing the winning run for Boels Dolmans. She won from a sprint of some 30 riders. Pieters having to maintain hers for some 300 metres though. Alexis Ryan of Canyon SRAM came second. She'd come down in a heavy crash. She recovered from that. And Chloe Hosking, Ali Cipollini of third. And then Trofeo Alfredo Binda, or Binda as you call it. Is it Binda or Binda?
Binda.
I was sort of using an Italian pronunciation there. Binda.
Binda.
No?
Well,
I don't know.
Binda.
Do I look Italian?
Certainly don't sound it. And we had a wonderful victory from Kasia Niewiadoma, a solo win, which she said was inspired by Vincenzo Nibali's win the day before in Milan San Remo. It could just as well have been inspired by herself, though, of course, at last year's Women's Tour. No stranger to long solo wins. And it was a first win for her in her new team, Canyon SRAM, put her at the top of the Women's World Tour. Second went to world champion Chantal Black of of Boels Dolmans, and third, European champion Marianne of Wow Deals. So an incredible podium there, and a strong race for Canyon SRAM, 3 in the top 10 in that race. Which brings me to a few notable other races that I wanted to mention. Setmana Ciclista Valenciana, that caught my eye because again it had 3 top 10s for Canyon SRAM, including Hannah Barnes, who won the overall, and 2 stage wins as well, bookending the race with victories on stages 1 and 4. Boels Dolmans weren't at that race, but still it shows a lovely coming together of Canyon SRAM at this stage in the season. Umloop van het Hageland was worth a mention because it's one of the races that we could watch all the way through. It was live streamed and fantastic for it. Ellen van Dijk of Sunweb with a brilliant attack in the final kilometres to lead home a reduced bunch sprint of Chloe Hosking. On the podium again, close but no cigar, of Ali Cipollini and Julian Dora of Mitchelton Scott. And a final mention to Drentse Acht van Westerveld, because Alexis Ryan won that one from a bunch sprint, and that was her first UCI win just before she went on to get the podium the weekend after. Julian Dora of Mitchelton Scott second, and Chloe Hosking again of Ali Cipollini. So a brilliant first win for Alexis Ryan over sprinters like that. It was a busy inaugural Driedags de Pannekoek side. Crashes, tram tracks, bad weather, all playing a part in the race. Julian Dora took her first win of the season, making that her first win for Mitchelton Scott. She hadn't actually realised she'd won though. The Belgian champion thought the break hadn't been caught and she was sprinting for a lower placing in the top 10. She didn't actually realise she was sprinting for the top step of the podium. Well, that break formed after 20 kilometres with Dora's teammate Gracie Elvin, one of around 15 riders who stayed out front for much of the day. We'll hear from Elvin and about her work with the relatively newly formed the Cyclists Alliance later in this episode. Mika Kruger of Team Virtue launched a potentially brilliant attack out of what was then a reduced bunch inside the final 10 kilometres, but she and the pursuing escapees were finally caught inside the final K, setting up the bunch sprint. Chloe Hosking of Ali Cipollini with her 4th podium since racing moved to the Northern Hemisphere. She finished second, and an impressive finish for Boels Dolmans' Christine Majerus, who was a part of that early break but punctured and had to drop back to the bunch. The Luxembourg champion managing to recover her race for 3rd. We had dry roads for the first time at the start of a women's World Tour race this year to start Ghent-Wevelgem. A high pace killed off most of the attacks throughout the day, setting up a thrilling final 10 kilometres. First Sunweb, then Boels Dolmans leading attack after attack. Came down to a bunch sprint though, with Chloe Hosking this time doing a brilliant lead out for former world champion Marta Bastianelli, who took the win from De Panne champion Julian Dora, who finished second for the second year in a row. Lisa Klein of Canyon SRAM with her first podium of the year, finishing 3rd. Now, worth a final mention is a statistic posted on Twitter by a gentleman, Dam van Reeth, who's a professor at Leuven University and researcher in sports economics. He posted scores of viewing figures for both the men's and women's Driedags de Pan. Men's, just over 253,000 spectators. Women's, over 234,000. So just a 7.5% difference in viewing figures. So Flemish fans, at least, seeming to show that if the races can be watched, the audience is there.
We'll talk about the Women's World Tour events, but some of the other races are quite notable and good events. I was at Het Nieuwsblad. Sort of mixed report from there, because the team's presentation was really good in the sense that the men and women were given equal billing. There was a presentation in the velodrome in Ghent, home to the Ghent 6. It was packed. It was nice and warm in there, absolutely freezing cold outside. And they were calling the men's and women's teams to the podium, where there was a men's and women's teams part of the same umbrella organisation. They would come on together, and it was a good presentation. But the problem again was TV coverage of the women's race. I was at the finish, and the men's race was playing out on the big screens, and then all of a sudden the women are in the finishing straight. Nobody's really been following it or aware of what's been going on. There's been the odd clip on social media, the odd update on social media, but nothing really to enable you to follow the race. And the crowd along the finishing straight, see some riders sprinting towards them, but they don't really know what's going on.
And on that note, I should say I didn't actually give the results of Newsblad, did I? So we're guilty of that as well now, until I correct it. So the winner was Christina Malling-Sigard of Team Virtue Cycling. She took it over Alexis Ryan and Maria Giulia Confalonieri.
Nice.
I think. But worth noting, Team Virtue Cycling, that's only the second year of that team. They've strengthened their numbers over the winter, and a really good result for them. Further evidence of the strength of Danish cycling as well. So that was an important win for her. But as you say, one that on the finish line, and unless you were really trying on social media, it was very difficult to actually find out what was going on.
We'll hear some of my interviews from that race in a moment or two. Alexis Ryan has been one of the stars of the season so far, and she was second there, and that was a real breakthrough performance for her. We'll hear from her in a moment, but I just want to mention before we do, Omloop van Het Hageland. I couldn't get there, unfortunately. I'd intended to go there, but I had to go to Kuurne, Brussels Kuurne, unfortunately, on the Sunday. And but I was staying with Jocelyn Ryan and Tim Harris in East Flanders, and Jocelyn lives near to where the race is held. And she thinks it's the best organised women's race outside of the women's tour. It's a local race. It's a community organised race. The cycling club is involved. As you say, it was live streamed. There was a good crowd, and it was a good race. So perhaps that's one for the World Tour in the future. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I will try and go, I think, next year, because it sounds like a good one. Let's hear, shall we, from Het Nieuwsblad, because as I mentioned, it was a good, tough race, and not on the Women's World Tour. Alexis Ryan was second. Friend of the podcast, of course. She kept a diary for us at the Women's Tour of California last year. That was released as a Friends special. But she's a young, up-and-coming rider, obviously a very good sprinter, and she's been riding well this year. So here she is. We'll hear first from her, then we'll hear from Coryn Rivera, who had her breakout season last year, I suppose, when she came to Europe. And then we'll hear from Alice Barnes, Hannah Barnes' sister, and she's now ready for Canyon SRAM, of course, although they haven't raced together yet, I don't believe. Here they are, Alexis Ryan, Coryn Rivera, and Alice Barnes. Alexis, you must be delighted. I mean, that's a terrific result today, second.
Yeah, I am really happy. I was targeting this race to actually win, but second is still pretty good, I think, for the first race of the season. So, and it shows that I'm on good form. It was
an unusually big group at the finish. So had the race been a little bit more selective, you might have fancied your chances a bit more.
I think so, yeah. The girls and I were just talking in the camper. It wasn't as hard as we were expecting it to be. And I'm not exactly sure why, but when we went over the mirror with just that select group, no one wanted to work. And then the group came back together again. So I think if people had been more motivated to stay on the gas over all the hard climbs, then it would have been a much smaller group coming to the finish.
Is that just an early season thing where people are unsure of maybe new teams, new teammates, unknown form?
I think, but I also think it's because the course is completely different. No one's used to this one. So before it's been, the Paterberg's been in there, and people just knew how it was going to come down, and they would race it hard because they knew the history of the race. And now, since it's changed so much, no one really knew. No one knew how much the Muir and the Bosberg would take out of them. So I think people were conserving a bit more, and just kind of afraid to take chances. So,
but to finish on the podium, and you're about to go and do the podium now in a race like this, it's a big step up for you, isn't it? It's a great result.
It is, yeah. I've never podiumed in a classics race before, and this has always been my goal to be a classics rider. So I've been working really hard over the winter, and the win would have been great, but the second place is still a nice consolation to show that the work that I put in has been worth it.
It's unusual to see such a big group contest the finish. Was that just all down to the wind?
Yeah, to my opinion, yeah. I think it's just really hard to get something going with such a full headwind on a lot of parts of the course. So, it made for a hard race, no doubt. And, the sections that everyone thought were going to be hard and make selections, there were selections, but, eventually it just went back together because no one wanted to keep going.
You were having quite an animated sort of debrief there with your teammates. Obviously a complicated race tactically, and when you've got such a big group, I guess it becomes complicated.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's the first version of this race, and debriefing and seeing what we could have done better, and of course we're not super happy. I think teamwork wise we did really well communicating, but there's always something you can do better.
What do you learn for this first big race of the year? A lot of riders in new kit, new teams with sort of rejigged lineups. What do you learn from today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just kind of shaking out everything, shaking out the off-season, the winter, and, seeing where everyone's form is. And, yeah, I think there's some good new groups of riders now. Jolene is now with Orca, so they have different cards to play now with a good sprinter. And, it should make for a good year.
I don't know if it was a tough race. Obviously, the climbs are always tough. Yeah, no one was really carrying on. But, yeah, I feel like I did a good job. It's the first time I've really played a big team role, because last year, a lot of my races I was doing on my own. And, yeah, I felt better than I thought I would for my first race. So I'm really happy the form seems to be coming. And, it was nice that we could finish it off with second as well.
First impressions with the team. Have you had a training camp with them over the winter? Have you got to know them all quite well?
Yeah, we've had 2 camps. We had one in December just to get to know each other, and we had a 2-week camp just last week. So, yeah, I really enjoy it. It's a nice team to be around, and, yeah, really nice and professional. So,
watching your sister's success as well. She started the season very well.
Yeah, she's done really well. So, yeah, I was saying the other day when I saw it, it's nice that I can be happy for my sister and my team at the same time.
So, no conflicts this year?
No, not anymore.
Yeah. It's quite a different role you've got, isn't it, being in a team like this? Is that quite an adjustment that you have to make? Did you find yourself in the race today having to think about more than just maybe your own performance, but also about the job that you were there to do for the team?
It's different that I don't have to constantly think about myself, and I'm not going into every race with loads of pressure that I'm the one that has to get the result. So it's nice being able to look around, look for your teammates, and I think even wearing the well-known jersey, one of the bigger teams, I felt a bit more respect, which is quite nice, so I didn't get bullied as much.
You are listening to the Cycling Podcast Féminin, supported by Rapha, celebrating the sport and producing the finest cycling clothing since 2004.
Thank you very much indeed to our main sponsor, Rapha. The Pedalers de Charme t-shirts are finally available and on the website. If you go to the apparel at it's not shop called shop, it's called apparel on the cyclingpodcast.com. Not my decision.
You sound and look so Scottish the way you say that.
Not my decision. I spent ages looking for shop.
Take a swig of Iron Brew afterwards.
Anyway,
make it more
click
authentic.
click on that strange word, and it will take you to our page on the Rapha website, and you'll be able to get your Pedalers de Charme t-shirt and Pedalers de Charme jerseys coming soon. And we're very grateful to Rapha for supporting the Cycling Podcast and the Cycling Podcast Féminin. We heard before the little break there from Alexis Ryan, Coryn Rivera and Alice Barnes. Alice Barnes, of course, at Kasia Niewiadoma now, a big step up for her, a new role for her. She's gone from a relatively small team where she was a leader most of the time to a team where she's playing a support role. But that team, you mentioned Bulls Dolmans earlier, Orla, they have been dominant the last few years, still got very strong riders, obviously. But things look a lot more equal, and that team, Kasia Niewiadoma, has really started the season very well on multiple fronts. Hannah Barnes winning down in Spain, Kasia Niewiadoma winning her first one-day World Tour race. And
2018, Richard.
And then Alexis Ryan, they've been racing on sort of 3 different fronts, and they've been performing on each one. Very impressive. And it's a team that a lot of people might say has underperformed a bit the last couple of years. So what's made the difference there? I mean, Rose, you were at the Binda, latest World Tour race. That was a very strong team performance and a great win by Kasia Niewiadoma, a fantastic attack on the climb where she made sort of multiple efforts and just broke everybody, it seemed, by the end. But it was a great team performance. What is it that's clicked there? Is it just her arrival? Is she been the person who's made the difference? Or, it seems across the board that all the riders have stepped up.
Yeah, it's interesting because Kasia is, like Alice Barnes, was like kind of almost like, obviously she was in a team with Marianne Vos, but in the races that Kasia was targeting, she would have to go it alone. Like all those Ardennes podiums that she got, she was just battling with almost the might of the whole of the Bulls Dolmans team. So it's funny that they've kind of taken these very strong riders from these teams where they were kind of had no support, and they've put them into a team role where they are working for one person or working together. And if you have a look at Binda, as Orla said in the roundup, there was 3 in the top 10, Pauline Ferrand-Prévot, Elena Amilusek and Kasia who won. And the whole run-up to Kasia going on the attack, it was Pauline on the front, breaking the legs of everyone behind, and then Elinor took over. And when you watch them carefully, they're always looking over their shoulder, checking. Is Kasia still there? Where is she? And then as soon as Kasia's gone, then they're obviously slowing down the rest of the pack behind. And so it was completely a team performance. And that's something that Kasia hasn't had before, and Alice hasn't been a part of before, or been able to be part of before. And I think that now that's such a strong team, and when they work together for one person, that's when the results come.
And it seems almost a wonderful case of serendipity as well, because you had Niewiadoma, who maybe needed a stronger support network around her, and she's now on the team where her best friend rides, Pauline Ferrand-Prévot. So you've got that complicity of relationship established already. There's nothing forced about that. They'll want to work for each other. And then with Alice coming on board with Hannah, you've got these relationships in place that don't need to be fabricated. You don't need to explain why anybody needs to ride for anybody else. And it just seems to have worked out beautifully well, that time and opportunity have conjoined to make it so that these riders have ended up in the same team at the same time. You can bring, like Bose Dolmans have done, and obviously those girls have been in that team mostly now for a long time, but you've brought them together where they've now had incredible success, and they've learned their relationships as they've ridden together. Or as in the case of Canyon SRAM, you've got a few relationships that are established already, and I think that'll make for a very exciting dynamic on the road.
You look at the age as well. I mean, Hannah Barnes, Alexis Ryan and Niewiadoma are all 23, 24 years old. They're young, but they're just coming into an age where, you know, they should be starting to fulfill the talent that they have. And I think we saw Hannah Barnes last year really, towards the end of the year, there were signs that she was ready to step up and start to win some big races, and you know, they've got this collection of talent that they'll all sort of feed off each other, I would imagine. Shall we hear from Binda, your interviews? You spoke to Niewiadoma at the finish, and you spoke to Marianne Vos as well. A good result from her. Let's hear from them now. First Niewiadoma and then Marianne Vos.
Now, Kasia, you were very emotional on the line. What was going through your head?
You know, the thing is that my first race here was also in the same conditions. So it was like raining, it was really cold, and it was like shortly after my grandpa passed away. So all the time I was like thinking about him, thinking like, oh, I really want to do a good job here for you, like to make you feel proud of me. And that day I was like just 19, so I couldn't do much, but I managed to finish this race. And today, like, same conditions and kind of same thoughts that I just want to give this victory for him, even when he's not here, but I feel like he was just watching over. So I'm like, I did it, Grandpa.
Well, that's great. And also, it seems like you're really enjoying being at Canyon SRAM. What's it like?
Yeah, it's really amazing. It shows me that, of course, I can't complain about my teams that I had previously, but with Canyon, it's like they give me a spring in my step, you know, like I feel so good, and like they really have a huge faith in me. And also it's like it's not only everything on my shoulders. We like share that everyone has to do something, and we know that every of us can win something, but like the comfort that I could like today just save my energy for the first part of the race, just be there but not responsible to create some scenes or like different actions, just like waiting for my moment and then give my all, and I was able to do that.
You seem so confident and happy at the moment. Is that what's going on? Is that what's kind of giving you that extra energy?
Yeah, like also the last question that I was asked, you know, when you are happy in your private life, when everything goes well, then you can like really bring it on the bike and bring it to the result. So I have really amazing time with my friends, family, with my boyfriend, so like everything. I feel like I'm blooming all the time, so it's really nice.
Perfect, thanks Kasia.
Thank you so much.
So Marianne, you got a podium today that you weren't expecting. What do you put that down to? Good condition?
Well, good weather condition for me. No, it was last week was my first race, and actually I was already felt good. So I had a good preparation up to the season, and I'm happy to have this shape now in this moment of the season.
And were you a bit disappointed about your cyclocross season? And does this make up for it?
Well, obviously I wasn't really happy with my cyclocross season. Actually not, only the last one was okay, the one after Rods, but it happens, and I know how that works. So for me, then the focus was on the road season, and I did everything I could to be ready for these races. Of course, some great spring classics coming up after this even. So I did Drenthe, now Binda, and now Belgian classics are coming. So I'm looking forward. And does this make it up? Well, it's sport, so there's always a next one.
And what about the team? Has the dynamic changed a lot with Kasia leaving?
I don't know. Of course, it's great to have Kasia in the team, and if you see her win here today, it's a great athlete. So, but our team is well balanced, and I'm very happy to see the green all the time in front, and they do really well. And for me today, it was really good to see them all the time in front and in control of the race, and it was up to me to be there in the final.
So that was Marianne Vos, and before that, Kasia Niewiadoma, both on the podium, but quite a contrast in demeanours there I detected. Is that fair to say, Rose?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kasia was just absolutely euphoric, and when I was on the finish line, an Italian journalist said to me it was like she was flying and crying. She threw her arms out when she came across the line and burst into tears and was gasping for breath, and Pauline had to Ferrand Prevot to come and give her a big hug, but she was just on another level of happy. And obviously if you're Marianne Vos, you're seeing this star rider who was in your team for the last couple of years now breaking out and getting a solo win. That's got to be a little bit frustrating maybe, but also you have to remember this is Marianne Vos. For her, she's won Binda before. She's won everything before, hasn't she, basically? But for her, kind of a podium at Binda after a not so great cyclocross season, she'll be looking forward. She'll be looking for getting a result in one of the big classics coming up, I think.
And it's always the horrific thing about elite sport, isn't it? There's nowhere to hide. So your moments of glory are done in front of an adoring public. And then when you're not at the peak of your performance anymore, you still have to suffer that glare of attention, really. And, podium is still fantastic, but she's not producing the results that certainly she would like to be doing at this stage. But it's really lovely listening to Niewiadoma as well, because we've said it before, that you can just tell that she's really happy. And when she referenced that, it just made sense to me, because once everything sort of clicks in some way, and as I've said it before, but I think it's worth repeating, because once you're in that little bubble of things just working, then you don't know where that can lead to. And I think in the Ardennes week, it's going to be really exciting to see what she might be able to do. 3 podiums last year, with that team around her, with that momentum, with the confidence that all of that brings. We're looking at some brilliant things, hopefully, from her this year, I think.
And Anna van der Breggen won Strade Bianche, of course. And, there's a few really, riders at the top of their game coming together in those kinds of races. Marianne Vos, I wonder if she's at the same level that she was at a few years ago, and it's just that everybody else has got better. I mean, I kind of suspect that's the case. She'll know, how her current performance compares to 5-6 years ago when she won everything. I remember the Florence World Championships 2013. She just kind of made it look quite easy. And it must be really, really hard, to just adapt to these changed circumstances where, a podium is most riders would be really, really happy with that. I'd love to know just physically, physiologically, how she compares now to, when she was in her absolute pomp.
And I think that the top riders at the moment have the advantage of each other for competition. So you're always having to outwit everybody else. You're always having to find new tricks, if you like. Whereas she was dominant for so long, it didn't necessarily do her any favours at this stage of her career, because she maybe hasn't had to be as wily as some of her competitors right now. And it's difficult, I guess, to learn new tricks.
But also, I think,
in your career,
it is a bit more of a team game now. And it used to be strongest rider will win every race, and Marianne Vos was the strongest rider. Now it's kind of the team tactics are so much more vital, as we were saying earlier about Canyon SRAM. That's what Boels Dolmans do so well, because they have people to burn, as domestiques, and that's what Canyon SRAM can now do. And I think maybe that gets the edge over on Marianne, because she's I have this habit of thinking that she must be nearing retirement.
40.
Yeah.
Nowhere near.
Because she's been around for so long, but she's only 30, I think, and I don't want to speak out of turn. And if you think about Annemiek van Vleuten, she's 35. I really hope that's right. I'm not getting that wrong.
We're going for 60% accuracy. Yeah. Rose, you're fine.
I'm actually researching this as we speak. I think Marianne Vos is 30, but let's check. Yeah. Let's check with the internet.
So if you think Van Vleuten is just coming into being, having an incredible season, just being so dominant and powerful, and she's 5 years older than Vos, it's certainly not kind of Marianne's decline that might be seeing that she's not getting the results.
So what is it about her team then, or her team choices? Why is she not putting herself in the position whereby she is surrounded by riders who can help her win? Because that's what champions tend to do, isn't it?
That's, true. And I think they always go out with the intention of doing that kind of team tactic. But I think they've got quite a lot of young riders. The team hasn't got a lot of budget. It's kind of Marianne Vos's team, and perhaps they don't have... I mean, Canyon SRAM's kind of got a team full of possible winners. Mm-hmm. Same with Boels Dolmans. You think, watching Binder, you could say, Pauline might win this, or Kasia might win this. There's so many people that could win each race. And I think with Wow Deals, as it now is, people are only ever really looking at Marianne to win that. And possibly also that means that it's easier as another team to defend against. Yeah. If you know there's only that one rider they're going to be riding for, then you know exactly who to watch out for when they attack. But if you've got Canyon SRAM and any number of rider goes off the front, you're thinking, is that going to be the winning move, or is that just...
Is that who they're going for? Or is that just a bit of play? Or,
So I think maybe that's not going in Marianne's favour.
Well, it wasn't necessarily a fact in the past, but she was, when she was dominant, she was also in the best team. Rabobank were the top women's team by some margins, so not necessarily a factor, but her circumstances have changed where she no longer is a dominant rider individually, but she's also no longer in the strongest team. You take your hat off to her for carrying on in a way. It sounds a strange thing to say, but it must be difficult. It must be really difficult, and we see it, in cycling in some disciplines, sprinters can lose their edge as well and adapt to, not winning so much or even not winning at all.
But at the same time, if you look at the trend, and it might be different with her because she was so dominant at a young age, but women do tend to come into their own, or at least they can do certainly at a later stage. If you look at the last Olympics, for example, with the time trial, I've lost it now.
Kristen
Armstrong. We had a whole period around there of slightly older riders doing quite well, and I don't know, I know we're going to come on to talk about this, but it'll be really interesting to see, for example, when Lizzie Deignan comes back from having a baby, because that is said to give you an extra sense of strength. Not a sense of strength, it's physiological. It I don't know what it does, but it gives you some sort of a boost anyway. And you can see that certain athletes in certain disciplines can get better with age for a certain time. So it's not the end of her career by any means. I feel like we're almost writing her off already. Are we?
Speak for yourself.
I'm not.
Yeah. But I think, Orla, you're right about saying about Kristen Armstrong being older, and she was so specialised. She's so specialised in doing that time trial and getting that Olympic gold. That was her one focus, not to do well in all the other races that she did, but just to do that. And maybe that is Marianne's issue, in that she's won everything, and she won everything on every terrain and every style of race. That where do you specialise now? Where do you think that is the race that I'm best at, when the level of all the other riders is going up and up and up?
She had a period out of racing, of course, a couple of years ago, where she seemed to just be burnt out, and I did an interview with her at that time where she said that she recognised she'd just done too much, and she's also won Olympic medals on the track. She's done everything, and there was a period of time where she was, racing a full cyclocross season in the winter and then a full road season in the summer. And I think it just caught up with her in the end. And I'm sure she manages herself a little bit better now. But yeah, it can be a bit of a curse being good at everything. But who knows? It would be she's European champion now, isn't she? So that was quite a good win for her last year. She could win Tour Flanders or Liège-Bastogne-Liège or Amstel Gold Race, and she's right back up where she was, and that would be a great story, wouldn't it?
And she did get a podium at Binder, lest us forget.
I know, that's the thing. We're talking about
down, but
exactly that. But that's the problem with being Marianne Vos.
Yeah.
The Cycling Podcast Féminin is supported by Science in Sport. Science in Sport, fueled by science.
Thank you very much to Science and Sport for sponsoring the Cycling Podcast Féminin, and you can get 25% off all your Science and Sport products at scienceandsport.com with the code SISCP25. SISCP25. A last shout out as well for any questions for Science and Sports experts, please. I'm meeting them in early April, so get your questions in. Contact at thecyclingpodcast.com. Any sports nutrition questions relating either to yourself or to the pros. We've had some really good ones, so we'll play them throughout the year. So thanks again to Science and Sport. You mentioned Lizzie Deignan, Orla, in the last part, and she, obviously, the news that she's pregnant and expecting a baby in September.
Congratulations, Lizzie and Philip.
Congratulations. Now, you saw her at the launch of the women's tour before she had announced that publicly. I did, and she was coy. Well, she was coy about her racing. With all the other riders present, had changed into her lycra for a photo shoot to announce the route launch. So in hindsight, I'm looking to see, could I have noticed anything? But athletically trim as ever. Yes, very coy about her racing, because obviously we haven't seen her at any of the races so far this year. So I asked her what her first race would be. And Lizzie would usually be a generous interviewee and very friendly. And I got a very curt one-word response to that. So I said, what's your first race, Lizzie? Binda. That was it. Right. We'll move on then, shall we? I'll find another question. Obviously now I understand why that was, but her team, Bowles Almonds, have said that they're fully supporting her through taking time off, maternity leave and everything, and trying to get back on the bike and back to winning ways again when she returns from having her baby. So yeah, full credit to them for giving that support. You say that, but would you expect anything else? I mean, in any other industry, that's what you'd be entitled to. It is what you'd be entitled to. The subtleties of going on maternity leave, though, are quite specific to any particular business that you work in. So, yeah, you would expect it. You would expect it at Elite Cycling. And there's nothing else that they could really do or be seen to be doing. And it'll be up to her to prove herself afterwards, really. Yeah, so I guess they're keeping her position open, if you like. I spoke to her last week. I did an interview with her last week for something else. And I said, wait, did you think about racing? You know, because, I mean, she could. I mean, the thing is, the aspect that, and I hadn't really properly thought this through, obviously the danger. Yeah, that's the first thing I would have thought. Because someone like Paula Radcliffe, carried on competing while pregnant, and in some sports you could do that, but in cycling it's more dangerous. And she's certainly continuing with her training and everything. But actually racing in anger is a very different prospect. I can't imagine. No, it was a stupid question. I can't believe I've actually... But it's all right, you've never been pregnant. So I can't believe I've actually confessed to it. Because, Did she laugh? Or was she quite generous? She kind of laughed, yeah. She kind of laughed. But anyway. Maybe a side look. Anyway. Maybe I gave her an idea. Maybe we'll see her at Liège Bastogne-Liège, who knows? Anyway, what else from the women's tour, Orla? Women's tour was, for anyone interested in the route, first ever visit to Wales. So going through Snowdonia National Park and finishing in Wales, which is nice because we had it finishing in London last year. And I like that they do their own thing and don't seem to think that the glitz and the supposed glamour of the bright London lights. That's what we should be aiming for. I like that they're taking it around the country as much as they can, but obviously the big news was equal prize money, €90,000 pot now for the women, which is the same as for the men's equivalent, the Tour of Britain. Now, one of the things that came up with this, because you can never keep everybody happy, was that the women's GC, for example, is the same prize fund as it is for the men's GC, even though for the women's race it's 5 stages and for the men's race it's 7 stages. So what they were saying in terms of trying to explain it is that it's a bit like Wimbledon. So you play fewer sets as a woman, but you've got the same prize pot. And obviously there's slightly less money involved because there are fewer stages. So when it comes to jerseys and whatnot, there's not quite as much money. But jersey for jersey, day for day, it's exactly the same amount of money. So when you put that into context, €90,000, their prize fund before that was $35,000, which was already 3 times the minimum requirement of the UCI. So they had already gone 3 times over that. Now they've almost tripled it. And
they also announced this, whether very cleverly or by a quirk of timing fate, on the eve of International Women's Day. So I found that as soon as I tweeted it, everybody was in that mindset already. Everybody getting ready to be cynical, latch on to certain causes, to find certain things to flag up, to either applaud or to criticise. And so it went down incredibly well. So very good PR.
Well, it is great PR. It's a great headline, but in a practical sense, it's not going to make any difference to most of the riders.
Not much. And that's something that Lizzie actually said to me, not with great conviction because she thinks it's a great thing, but obviously in a practical sense, you've got €150 per day as a prize for wearing a jersey. So that's not going to make a huge amount of difference. However, I would say that the riders have one perspective, and that's not necessarily to see the wider picture, because for them it might not make a massive amount of difference for what they're racing for, but they've got their contracts already, and in truth, prize money never really will change their lives. It's all to do with everything that comes around it, the contracts and the sponsorship and everything else. What's really important though, and what they've got right, I think, on this, is that for the sport to be taken seriously by anyone outside of cycling, outside of women's cycling, it has to take itself seriously. And I think that this is a fantastic statement of intent. It's showing that they mean business. It's showing that women's cycling is worthy of the same investment as men's cycling. That is encouraging for other sponsors. And it's almost like the Kevin Costner film Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. They are creating it, and in the hope that others will come to it. They will certainly not be turned off the sport by something like this. It can only do good if it does anything. And I think for the wider financial structure of the support of the sport, it's a very good thing.
And essentially, I think you spoke about WTA last month, Rose, Women's Tennis Association, which it really came about over the issue of prize money. I mean, prize money a bigger deal in tennis, because that's what the players kind of live on rather than salaries. And it was that issue of prize money. I think it was a 12-1 discrepancy between men's and women's tennis at the time in the early 70s. I've just been looking into this, and it was that issue that really brought about the formation of the WTA. So it was a catalyst for that, and you know, as you say, there is a bigger picture beyond just what most of the riders will actually earn. Now, just before we move on, we spoke about the Women's Tour last month's episode, and we had some correspondence also from Jocelyn Ryan, who is a friend of the podcast, and Jocelyn works as team liaison on Women's Tour and on the Tour of Britain and other races. She also lives in Belgium with her partner Tim Harris, a former professional. They have a couple of houses, but one of them is given over to young cyclists who go over every year to Belgium to try and turn professional. Before we hear from Jocelyn, because she had an interesting point to make about the Women's Tour, I went and stayed a few days with them recently and made a Friends special. Features a couple of young British female riders, Ciara McVitie and Holly Flannery. And that episode is available to friends of the podcast, thecyclingpodcast.com, to become a friend. The riders are also keeping audio diaries this year, so at the end of the year, or maybe before the end of the year, we'll release some episodes following their progress as they try to attract the attention of professional teams. Back to the point that Jocelyn was making. Jocelyn, as I said, works on the Women's Tour, and she had a very interesting point to make that I'd never heard before. I didn't really know. Here's what Jocelyn had to say.
A lot of members of the organisation, the people that work for the organisation, are women. This is increasing, seems to be increasing year on year. For example, last year, 2017, we had for the first time Commissaire President was a woman, the Dutch lady Mirjam van Es, very well respected as she did a fabulous job. Radio Tour, the person that sits in the back of the Commissaire President's car, was also a woman, Julia Gilbert. I think that was for the first time as well. Moving on, Chief Judge Carol Lee. She was reprising the role that I think she's carried out now for quite a number of years on the Tour of Britain. We've got myself. I am the team liaison. I've done that role for every edition of the Women's Tour. Podium manager. We have a podium manager, by the way. We don't have podium girls. Lisa English. She's excellent at that job. We've got people that many others might have heard of before, such as Grace Metcalf does a great job, PR, etc. The start manager, last year was Ailsa Buck, and I think that was a new position for her. The race admin manager, Pippa, she is also big in track racing. She runs a lot of events at the London Velodrome as well. So you can see that we have quite a lot of women there in the organisation doing important jobs, and I would think that has a little bit of an effect on the women riders, etc. It's more of an equitable environment for them. I think that's one of the great strengths of the Women's Tour, is that it's not part of the Men's Tour. The people that work on the Women's Tour all work on the Men's Tour as well. I've worked on the Men's Tour since the inception, which I think was in 2004, so that's been going for an awful long time, and I do exactly the same job on that race that I do on the Women's Tour, and most of us actually replicate those jobs. So we are experienced from the Men's Tour, and what we did, we carried that over into the Women's Tour and said we're going to do exactly the same job, we're going to treat them exactly the same way, and that's one of the things I think that we stand by and that we do.
So that's absolutely fascinating, and it's not something I knew about the Women's Tour. And it's one of those things that from the outside, and I do apologise because I know a lot of our listeners are men, and this isn't to alienate men, but it's one of the things that men might think, well, why should that make a difference? You know, why do women need to work together and not with men? And it's not that necessarily, but what I think is interesting about that is that when you've got a group of women together, that they create their own rules and their own bubble, and you're not then governed by the world of men and its own rules, which generally has a ceiling on certain things that women can do, or the marketability of anything involved with women, because they will say, well, why do we care? But when you sell it to women, amongst women, well, we do care because we care, and it's just that we work differently, our brains work differently, and it's a different marketplace. And I think that has to have something to do with the success of the Women's Tour, surely, that lack of an externally imposed ceiling on something just because it's women's.
I do kind of see that, because a lot of the time with female DSs, the riders will say, you know, they're more comfortable to talk about kind of personal things they might be a bit shy about talking with men. But then it's difficult for me and you, Orla. We're women who work in men's cycling. I probably work in men's cycling as much as I work in women's cycling.
More so, probably.
Probably more so as well, yeah. That we saying then that, you know, we should stick to women's cycling and men a better place to report on men's cycling, but obviously, you know, that isn't the case.
No, and I don't think that is the case, and nobody, I don't think, would be saying that men shouldn't be working on women's races or they shouldn't be working in the Women's Tour. But in the same way that you get a pocket of men working together on something and it works for whatever reason, that the dynamics of that works, a pocket of women working together will also work for a separate reason. It doesn't mean, I don't think, that you have to exclude men or women from either or. And always with these things, always, any group is more productive and more intelligent collectively if they have men and women together in it. And so even though there are maybe more women on that race than in other races, there are still a heck of a lot of men in there. You know, it's still run by men, and most of the people from an organisational point of view that I saw at the route launch were still men. But I think it's maybe actually turning it the other way around, and not saying that it's a women's only environment, but just that there are more women, so there maybe is a better balance than there would be maybe in other races, whereby, again, if it's an adjunct to the men's race, there aren't necessarily any women involved in it, or women who understand the sport. I guess that's the other thing as well. And the Women's Tour have done a brilliant job of trying to understand the sport. But the more women you bring in from the women's side of cycling, the more they will understand what the needs are. I think it's a mixture of things, isn't it?
It is, and also I think that is a kind of a key issue I find with cycling in general, is that a lot of the time people are in positions where they don't have either the knowledge or experience or the qualifications for doing the job. There's so many kind of press officers in cycling, and they're kind of old ex-pros and things. And you think, well, surely what cycling needs, both men's and women's, are qualified people who are very good at whatever job they're doing, whether it be media or team liaison or whatever. And so I think that is the key message that Jocelyn is saying as well. It's not just that they are women, but they are qualified women who are very good at their positions. So it's not kind of just putting women in because of a quota. It's about having qualified
jobs for
people.
Girls. but jobs for boys is a big thing in male cycling, certainly. We're not going to talk about the Team Sky situation because that has nothing to do with the Cycling Podcast Féminin, but all these calls for Dave Brailsford to be sacked or resign, there is no tradition of that in cycling. There's no tradition. It just doesn't happen. Managers are not sacked. It's not football. And people tend to be in the same positions for years and years, whether they're qualified or not.
On a very different slant to mentioning Team Sky, what was really interesting actually about the Women's Tour, and again where they pulled off a blinder with their route launch, was the launch came on the week that the DCMS report was released into Team Sky's practices and British cycling practices, among other bits and pieces. And so you did have a number of journalists, sports journalists, but who they're very much from a news background, and wanted to get any angle whatsoever on whether Brailsford should be sacked or, you know, what this means for the state of cycling. And they asked the questions, but when we had the announcement of the equal pay, actually they found themselves in the middle of a story that was actually a very good story, but also a weighty one, not a fluffy, nice little superficial piece, but actually one that felt that it mattered in some way in the sporting landscape. And so they managed to pretty much deflect any of those questions.
Hijacked. The news agenda was hijacked
by themselves.
Yeah,
they actually managed to control a news agenda at their own news event. I don't think I've ever seen that before.
Anyway, you did actually speak to a couple of riders, didn't you?
About Team Sky.
Launch.
Oh, yeah. No.
Good for you, you old news hound, Orla.
At the Women's Tour launch, I spoke to Lizzie Deignan and Elinor Barker. We'll hear from Lizzie first and then Elinor.
I think at this point in time, gender equality is a massive issue, massive profile being given to it, and I think that's really important because there can kind of be no more excuses anymore. There's no going backwards, so let's focus on what happens going forwards.
In that respect, how important is it then to have the equal pay structure now that we've got for the Women's Tour and the Men's Tour of Britain, whether it's symbolic, whether it's a genuine financial incentive? How important is it regardless?
I think it's really important. It's not just a token gesture because the whole organisation is done so professionally. It's not just about putting a load of money in a prize pot. It's about the investment from OVO, meaning that we have live TV coverage, that accommodation, logistics, etc. is all on a level playing field with the men's race, and that's how it should be.
What do you make of the race routes this year?
I think it's really good. Yeah, I think it's going to be a really aggressive, tactical race, and that's great because we have the platform to showcase, you know, what cycling should be all about: fun, passion, excitement, drama. I think in this race you really have to be ready for anything. Like a flat day that looks easy could turn into the Queen stage with torrential rain and crosswinds. So you really need at least 3 women in the front to, you know, play your cards. So it's too early to call a leader for sure. Like, a lot can happen in a season, so we'll see.
So Elinor, you've had a quick look at the OVO Energy Women's Tour route for 2018. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I think it looks good. Very happy that it's finishing in Wales on the last stage. Pretty excited about that. And yeah, I think it looks like a very exciting route. And
fantastic news this time around that we're getting equal prize money with the Men's Tour of Britain. How important is that?
That's incredible news. I think the total prize pot is just under £90,000 for the week, which is insane. Yeah, a huge amount of money. I think it's just nice that we're finally getting a fair recognition and reward for what we're doing.
Do you think in terms of professionalisation of women's cycling that prize money is important, or is it more symbolic? What are the pressing issues, do you think, when it comes to making women's cycling more professional?
I think it's equally as important as it is symbolic. I suppose going into the sport, if you know straight away that it is equal or on par or at least comparable with the men's side, it's just such a massive bonus. It's not something that you end up thinking about, and hopefully it means that in, I don't know, 10 maybe 15 years people won't be having conversations like this because it'll just be standard. It'll just be normal that you expect to be paid the same amount for what you do in the races that you win. But I think it also at the moment it's very important because there are a lot of women who don't get a living wage to ride a bike. So at the moment it's seen as a huge opportunity rather than a career option, I suppose.
How far are we away from that being resolved and having a women's peloton that is professional, where women are paid not just a minimum wage but, as you say, a living wage?
I'd like to say not far at all. It seems like it's having a bit of a snowball effect at the moment, and having sponsors like OVO putting up huge prize pots, it means we're putting on events like this, and there's a huge amount of media attention around events such as the Women's Tour. So you have more media, you have more money, you have better riders, you have more media, you have more money, you have better riders, and it just goes on and on and on. And yeah, it's just this big snowball effect that means it's just going to get more and more professional. And the leaps and bounds that I've seen in the 5 years that I've been professional is huge. So hopefully that'll carry on. And again, in another 5 years, it'll be a completely different sport almost.
So what do you think at this stage we need to add into that snowball? What are the things that we need to be working on as a matter of priority to be able to get to a stage where these conversations become redundant?
I think being able to watch races more easily. I know it's not always as simple as that, but I know anytime there's a live stream, my own Twitter feed is going mental for it and saying how glad they are that they can finally watch this race, because these races have been going on for years and no one ever really knows what's going on, and you get one person's view of the race from Twitter and they're at the back of the car, they can't really see what's going on. If you actually have a live stream, you can see the racing, people can actually appreciate the sport. Sponsors want to get more involved because they're the sponsor's name's on the jersey that's being seen on TV.
Is there a feeling of momentum from within the women's peloton at the moment that things are changing? Is there a sign of positivity? Because for many, many years, quite understandably, the discussions around this have been quite negative and talking about what we don't have or what women's cycling doesn't have. Is there a feeling more now of positivity and a more optimistic outlook?
Yeah, I would like to think so. There are a lot of women who can make a career for it, out of it, and there are even more women now who do get a living wage. Not everybody, of course. I think there's probably still a few riders per road team, no matter how successful, who aren't being paid enough to live on. But it is actually a tangible goal to be able to say, I want to be self-sufficient as a female cyclist, not relying on my parents or loans or anything like that, to be able to just do what I do well.
So Elinor, back now to your season. You've come off the back of a World Track Championships that maybe didn't go quite according to plan. Talk us through that and what's next for you.
The Track Worlds was a little bit of a struggle for me, to be honest. I knew I wasn't going in with my best legs. I think I was still in an okay place, but I would have needed quite a bit of luck to get the results that I wanted. And unfortunately, I didn't have that at all. I had quite a heavy crash on the Omnium day halfway through, which just didn't really help matters, I suppose. So I finished 6th in that, and then didn't manage to retain my points race title, which I think I kind of knew was going to happen just based on the form that Kirsten Wild had. She was untouchable all week. Really fair play to her for winning all her titles. But it's not the end of the season at all. It's really just the start for me. So I've got Commonwealth Games coming up soon. I've got a few road races before that, and then I'll have a little holiday of a week or so. My road season starts from there.
How important are the Commonwealth Games in your cycle and in your season?
I love Commonwealth Games. I've only been to one so far, which was in Glasgow, so I'm not sure how different experience it'll be having a home games versus an away games. But I'm really excited, and I owe a huge amount of my career to Welsh cycling, so to be able to actually go back and work with the same people who took me to my first World Cups when I was 17, 18, it's really special to me.
That was Elinor Barker speaking at the launch of the Women's Tour. She had some interesting things to say. I haven't spoken to her before, but expressed herself very articulately, and some of the things she said are relevant to the next interview we're going to hear. I spoke recently to Gracie Elvin, who is one of the people helping to run the Cyclists Alliance, which is a group that was formed just over a year ago, to promote.
I think, isn't it?
Less than that.
Yeah, less than that.
Okay. Last year, to promote and represent women's cycling and women's cyclists. And they've got a very ambitious programme. Mentioned the WTA earlier, and they are sort of inspired a little bit by that, I think, and looking at how there's sort of equality in tennis now between men and women, and what they can do to help women's cycling at least aim for that. Let's hear from her now, Gracie Elvin, and we'll come in and talk about some of the things she mentions.
The idea was seeded a few years ago, I guess, with Iris Slappendale. She's been working a lot while she was still a rider, as a rider representative in the UCI, and I think she's seen a lot being on lots of different teams over the years, the good and the bad. I think once she finished her career as a cyclist, she felt like it was a really good time to start making even bigger impact. She developed a rider survey, and it was asking riders a lot of questions about their conditions and their salary. It was really interesting to see the results coming out of that, and nearly half the peloton responded, so it was pretty good to have a lot of data there, and really seeing that, she realised even more how it was important to have a rider union. So she asked myself and Carmen Small, and initially Lauren Rowney was helping us as well. And we just worked a lot over all of 2017 to develop what is now the Cyclists Alliance.
You've been a professional now for a few years. In the time that you've been racing, what sort of progress have you seen? And I guess the formation of the Cyclists Alliance is in itself progress, but how much have things improved while you've been racing?
From my personal perspective, I've had a really good run, so I'm in a position to help, I think. But when I did see those survey results, I was pretty surprised. I think from my perspective, it's been great to see new races come every year, especially some of them alongside some of the bigger men's races, like the Amstel Gold Race and a handful of other races that we didn't have before, and some bigger prize money races such as Ride London and the Women's Tour. And so I think there's been plenty of good news stories over the last few years, but I think they've definitely been blown out maybe more than they really are, because looking at those survey results, the actual important details haven't changed too much, and to see such a majority of riders still struggling to get by on no money, it was pretty interesting and made me even want to help out even more.
I guess so as well. You've got your eye on the bigger picture. A lot of athletes are very focused on their own careers, understandably so, and it's quite rare for athletes to have an eye on the bigger picture as well, which is the development of your sport. You mentioned the response rate had been really good from the riders. Do you get a sense from your fellow riders that they are really behind this and they are as keen as you are to bring about change?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We were surprised from the survey how many riders agreed that there should be rider representation, but since we've launched that, those numbers haven't exactly matched up. So I think there's still a lot of people that I think maybe they're nervous about doing something new and putting themselves out there. And we do ask for a fee to be paid as a membership, as a bit of a commitment, as well as helping us to continue with our work, because Carmen and Iris and I don't take away any money from this, but it still costs money to get some of our work done and start getting some of our programs going. So I think that the membership fee does put some riders off. We're not going to change that though, because like I said, it's a commitment that we want people to make for the sport, which is a commitment that we're making with our own time. So I think it's just going to be a slow process. We're in it for the long haul, and I think there's been other examples of other sports that just take a bit of time as well. And once a few big names start getting on board, and we already do have some really top riders have signed up, I think once other riders see that, then it'll start happening a little bit quicker. Once people can see the future of it and how it can really benefit riders and teams, I think people will start getting on board. And yeah, for sure, it's the riders that need to come together and a few big sponsors that need to come on board and just really say, look, we're fully behind women's cycling. We think it's great. We think women's cyclists are awesome and it's an awesome sport, and just keep promoting it and take it to a wider audience. A new system of racing, which is 2-tiered, which is World Tour, and then a level below that, because at the moment we're losing a lot of those smaller races where riders can really develop. We've really only got World Tour races now, so you're only really getting the A teams, and it's just not promoting that development of the sport. But on the other end of the spectrum, the Hammer Series or something similar, that could be a great model too. You could even have models that you have a whole bunch of development riders vying for a spot on a pro team. Yeah, I think we're only limited by our imaginations.
I sort of identified 4 things. That these are not all things that you're necessarily pushing for, but there were things that I thought of that people talk about in relation to women's cycling: minimum wage, women's Tour de France, TV coverage, and the argument that the men's World Tour teams should all have women's teams. Out of those 4 things, what would be the one that you would put the most emphasis on?
Minimum wage is, I think that's probably one of the highest priorities at the moment. For sure, you can't do it for every single team, and that's where a 2-tiered system would really come into the importance. You just introduce it to the top 15 or so teams in the world that could afford it to start with, and then have that trickle-down effect, hopefully within the next few years after that. But just to have that professionalism increased was really going to promote the professionalism of women's cycling in general, where women can really focus on the racing and not have to worry about finding work outside of the racing. We're really just working as hard as we can to get better working conditions for riders. So it's not just about minimum salary. That's really the selling point. But at the end of the day, it's really more than that. It's about how riders are being protected within teams and how they're being looked after with certain conditions and things such as healthcare, and making sure their contracts are really rock solid rather than just having something random on paper that the rider didn't even know what they signed. So yeah, just really protecting the interests of riders and making sure there's a lot more general conditions across the board, across all teams. Hopefully we can keep encouraging riders to not just look at our website and go, oh, what's in it for me, but really see it as what can I do to make my sport better for everyone. And there is a lot that you can do. So yeah, we're trying to figure out different ways to get the message across. But if this podcast can help, then that'll be great.
That was Gracie Elvin there. Still a top rider herself, of course, second in the Tour of Flanders last year, rides for Mitchelton Scott. It's impressive that, as well as, you know, focusing on her own career, she's involved in this group. And I did pick up, as I'm sure everybody listening did, some frustration that riders haven't perhaps joined or in the numbers that they would have hoped. It is still young. I said it was a year ago. It was last year they sent out the surveys, but the group itself only came into existence in December, didn't it? You reminded me, Orla.
And mid-December, I think.
But yeah, I mean, she said a lot of interesting things. We've spoken a bit about the minimum wage. You've written an excellent piece about that for Rouleur magazine, Orla. Without getting into the whole debate of the minimum wage, again, her solution to that issue is to have a two-tier system where you've got 15 World Tour teams and then teams a level below that. And I think she does make a good point about the Women's World Tour. Sorry, Rose. what are you sniggering about?
Sorry. Your bum keeps creaking.
No,
I think we have to explain it.
Yeah, okay. I don't know if that's coming across. I'm sitting on a Swiss ball and it might be creaking a bit. People probably think I'm on a boat. I like it.
You're on the Swiss ball. Orla's doing a sun salutation.
Listen, don't be encouraged by that email that I read out earlier, please. Don't be emboldened by that. We're talking about serious issues here.
Okay,
come on.
I'm back in the room.
Lost my train of thought. She said that it's all World Tour now. As we said earlier, it isn't. There are actually quite a few good races that aren't World Tour races. But I guess perhaps all the teams are trying to be at a similar level and riding World Tour races and other races. And perhaps what's missing is a level below that top level for development.
Like we were talking about earlier about the equal prize money, that's an initiative that's come from the races themselves. It's not come from the UCI. So it seems more and more that kind of minimum wages, all of this is not going to come from the UCI, but it's going to have to come from market pressures almost, stakeholders in cycling and the teams themselves thinking, well, if we want to have the best team, then we have to pay everyone a decent amount and be open and honest and clear that we are paying this amount so that we get the best riders in our roster, because it's not going to come from the UCI, I don't think. And
I think we have to be clear about what pressure to put on the UCI and make it very specific, because the UCI are not the employers of the riders. That is down to the teams, and it does have to be some sort of an alliance, if you like, between riders, teams and the market pressures and their sponsors to then get a group of teams together, however big that might be, to decide on a minimum wage. When it comes to the UCI, what they need to be doing, and in my mind, the only thing that they should be focusing on right now when it comes to women's cycling is renegotiating their broadcast rights with the race owners, because until they do that, and I mentioned this at in our live book tour, I got quite a good reception, so I think I'm not alone in thinking this, but if they are being serious, which they say they are, and you know, David Lepartien is still very young in his presidency, but if he is being serious about trying to promote women's cycling, it is very easy to at least pay lip service to saying that you're going to start to think about renegotiating race rights. So far, I haven't heard anything like that from him. And until he starts to do that, until the UCI try to have a better negotiation with them so that they are then responsible in a financial sense as well as a moral sense for the growth of the sport, then I can't really see what the UCI are going to be doing. In the meantime, parallel to that, you can have the teams, and we should have the teams working working towards a minimum wage together. But for that, they have to put in place, I think, a whole load of little programmes, individual programmes that are very specific to women's cycling. There are huge areas where women's cycling can exploit their potential in a way that men's cycling can't necessarily. And I wrote all about it in the Ruler magazine. I know we don't want to go on too much, the Ruler article rather. But there's a lot that can be done, and I think that any note of positivity that we get among the sport is well placed. I think it has to be worked on, and it's great that Gracie and Iris and the Cyclists Alliance are trying to do that. It needs more people on board and more will and more financial might behind it, and a more savvy commercial approach.
Good luck to them. I think they've got, the best interests of the sport at heart, and hopefully more female riders will kind of get involved with it. We want to focus largely on the racing, don't we? Hopefully we've spoken quite a bit about the racing. Let's remind ourselves the racing so far this year has been fantastic. Lots of different winners, different teams performing well, fantastic races, all so far run off in terrible weather. That'll maybe change,
which is brilliant to watch, though, isn't it?
Not to
love
work in,
it,
but
not to work in. But if you're sat at home in front of a dodgy stream, you love seeing a little bit of grit and grime and mud.
That's great. Long may it continue.
Sorry, ladies.
Anyway, we should wrap things up for this month. We'll be back next month. Rose still on probation. Maybe you'll join us again.
Not sure.
We'll see if we get any emails.
The Swiss ball thing.
Get your mum on board.
Yeah,
get her to send us an email.
Come on, Mum. Watch it. Please listen in for once, please.
Let us know if you want Rose to continue.
There'll be a Twitter poll at the end.
In or out? In or out? A simple in or out question. Let's have a referendum.
Who comes back, Rose or Richard's Swiss ball?
There's not room for both of us.
There's not room.
Both serve the same purpose, so just squeaking up in between.
I thought you meant you're going to come and volunteer for Richard.
If I need to. Catherine,
dear.
get an email back in, please.
Descending into
let's just leave it there, shall we? Orla, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rose.
Thank you.
You are listening to the Cycling Podcast Féminin, supported by Rapha, celebrating the sport and producing the finest cycling clothing since 2004.